Okay, good to see you all. Brene Brown Book Club. We have such a great topic today. I am here with Jen Manley, and we are going to just dive right into boundaries. And this is a topic we are both passionate about, and clearly all of you are too, because we got so much engagement from the multiple posts about quotes about boundaries from Brene, and why it's hard, and all the things. So we're going to just dive right into it. So Jen, this is one of your biggest topics for your own work with families who have kids with addiction. Just tell me more.
Yeah, so I work a lot. I talk a lot about boundaries. I actually have like a podcast, which you've been on. Podcast. A lot of my work revolves around the concept of like the unbreakable boundaries, which starts really working through and teaching people how to live a boundary lifestyle, right? People know pretty quickly what to expect from you when you live a boundary lifestyle, and you start becoming really clear about what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, and then how to communicate that with other people in a compassionate, loving way where people actually feel closer to you than separated from you. So yeah, so this is very near and dear to my heart of what I think is important, is boundaries as a lifestyle.
And I work with families, and so it comes up a ton with the parent-child relationship. And I love what you just said, that because so many people think of boundaries as almost a dirty word, that it's going to separate us, that it's going to be autocratic, that it's going to be cause them to judge me or react, or there's a lot of fear around setting boundaries. And I know from my own personal experience. So I love the quote you wrote in the thing just yesterday about how when boundaries help us say what's okay with me and what's not okay with me, and it helps us be autonomous. And why is that so important?
It becomes, I think it just revolves around clarity, right? If we're unclear what we want, then how do we establish that in our lives that we're doing the things that we want to do? This is where people start signing up for obligations that they don't really want to do, right? They're like, why am I doing this? Or they're working with difficult people that's just running all over them because there's no real clear definition of like the separation between you and them. It just becomes very blurry, and you're like, what, like this person is running all over me. To a certain extent, I say this in the most compassionate way, right? Like we allow them to run all over this because we're not really very clear about
Isn't
what
that
we're okay with.
Yes. Yes. And Brene Brown says it's actually enmeshment when we worry about pleasing them or what they're going to think or what they're going to feel. And then we're stuck instead of being with myself. What do I want? What am I feeling?
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure that you see that a lot, like even in your work where you may have, and you can tell me because you're the expert on this, because I work with much older, like we work with the same demographics, except at a very different point in their lives, right? So I can imagine that in your work, parents may start being concerned that either maybe they're being too harsh on the kids, or so they'll start letting things go maybe a little bit, questioning themselves, or just being unclear of what to do in that situation most of the time, because not a lot of parents have tons of experience with thousands of kids. They may have one or two, and they're like, what do I do here?
It's usually one of two things. If you're a parent like me, I was so worried about their being upset. I thought my job as a parent was for them not to be upset. And so when my older daughter would get super angry when I would set a boundary, I would be, oh, just kidding. Oh, I guess let's figure something else out. I'd go to withdraw and flexibility, and I would doubt myself. Mm-hmm. And the other reaction I see with parents is that they're super opinionated, they're super direct, they set boundaries, and the child just feels kind of squashed. So it usually is one extreme or the other, and neither is relating and compassionate.
Right. Well, and I think this is the part where like the boundary lifestyle, as well as honoring that this is very much a practice, right? And it will morph and change, and it won't be one way or another. You just established that spectrum of things, right? You've got one end of parents or the other end. And then somewhere there's like this teeter totter. And that's where like people that live boundaries lifestyles like myself, we kind of live a little bit on the teeter totter. And we don't always get it. I may go a little bit more over here sometimes and go, oh, maybe in the future, I can come back here. But yeah, it's like we're constantly kind of doing this. It's very dynamic. It's not a static thing, right?
Right. So I hear you being both flexible and strong, clear, and that you know when to toggle to which one.
Yeah. And she, Brene Brown talks, and she uses this because I think, if you've read any of Brene Brown's work, she talks some about like her history with like alcohol abuse and stuff. And she went to some meetings and she talked some about the serenity prayer. And what I love and hate about the serenity prayer is the third line. It's the wisdom to know the difference. And this is where we spend our lives, in that teeter totter of the wisdom to know the difference of when are we being too harsh? When do we need to be a little bit more flexible? Sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we may have to correct a little bit. I don't want to say wrong. I don't think it's wrong. I just think that maybe it's like, oh, that didn't feel good. Let's do something else next time. So
and for me, it's the part that really tripped me up was the whole feeling part, because I had repressed my feelings for so many years. And then my kids came and they had so many feelings every time I turned around, and that would send me into armor and shut me down or come out with offloading. And so I think that's why boundaries were so hard for me, because it brought up so much discomfort and emotion. And then I would just either be deer in the headlights, like, oh, or I'd be angry and yelling, and they would be cowering. So
right. And those are the parts like what you just said, and this is in the past, and I know you work really hard in this, but you said something really important where it's, trying to set those boundaries from that kind of reactive place, that emotional place, because something happens and then we just go bam. And then when those emotions kind of go away, like you're talking about, then our boundaries go away. So you see a lot of people talking about how they have a hard time upholding boundaries because they'll get really good at setting them from that reactive standpoint. And then when that reactivity and the chaos start dying down, the boundaries start fizzling.
Yeah. I love that, because you're right. And I have found and work with parents that it's actually not the best place to set a boundary when I'm super reactive and I've got no prefrontal cortex and I'm just all And so I guess one of the things is, when I'm feeling super reactive, take a pause and just go and get clear myself, because when I can speak and set a boundary from that centered place, it's going to go so much better, and it's going to be that compassionate relating thing that I want, instead of that thing that's going to push them farther away.
Yeah. And the reality is sometimes, especially living a boundaried lifestyle, where sometimes we get it right and sometimes we're like, oh man, I kind of went, because we get reactive because we're human, right? We do these things. And what I've gotten into a practice of is not saying I should never become reactive, because I think that's unrealistic. I think we're humans, and I think it's going to happen. I think it's critical to think about, when it does happen, what do I want to be in practice of when I have a chance to not be reactive? What are the boundaries that I establish that I want to keep? and like really being clear, and then being willing, and this is where it's difficult, being willing to have the next conversation with clarity and mindfulness of, hey, this is where I may have been a little off base here, but this is what I would like to see happen with myself in the future, or however you want to phrase that, depending on the situation, right? Where it's like being vulnerable enough, which is why Brene Brown's work is so important, but being vulnerable enough to have that conversation and says, this is what I would really need and like to see for myself. Yeah. After the emotions, from the very human reactions that we may have.
Yes. Oh, I love what you just said for multiple reasons. And one is that we get to be imperfect. We get to react. We get to be human. So that, I'm so glad you brought that up. And then the other is that secondary conversation. If you're in the middle of a reaction, notice, oh, I have steam coming out my ears. I'm really tense. My stomach is going crazy and I'm breathing shallow, or I'm not breathing at all. Oh, I think I need to pause. Can we circle back? Because it's not that we don't react, it's that I don't react at you.
Right. And that's, you know what? That is absolutely a practice. It's a moment, because sometimes it's like we lose all our sense of self. I lose my sense of self. And this is where it's like, when I describe like the unbreakable boundaries, it's more going into the practice of the lifestyle, where we're just being mindful about things, but we may not always get everything the way that we want it to be on the first go around. It's the constant improvement, the constant mindfulness of it, the vulnerability of it, and paying attention to where our shame buttons may get hit.
Yeah.
And I know you see that a lot in your work.
Yeah. So let's walk through an example. So say I have a teenager and they either stay out too late or they are trying alcohol. These are some of the common ones that come up. And I say, okay, what's okay with me is that you go with your friends. I want you to meet your need for fun and play. I want you to have autonomy. I want you to feel empowered, all that. And I am not okay with you having alcohol. You're too young, you're 14, for example. And so what would an unbreakable boundary look like? Because one of the things I know I've gotten tripped up in is I'm all like, I'm the boss, and the teens hate that. It just totally hits their shame button and their trigger. And so how can we stay in relationship as we go through this? Because I want to say, I know I used to think boundaries is setting it for them. And especially teens who are becoming more independent, again, hate it and they resist it. And that was one of the comments that came up over and over is, how do you hold boundaries when they have a big reaction? And so, yeah, talk us through that.
Well, okay. So I'm gonna actually throw this back. So if we take, because I think we can back into this a little bit. So, because like substances, it starts getting triggered, right? But let's just take it out of the realm. Let's say same situation, same concept, even for you, when you're talking to a parent that has a 14-year-old kid and things, maybe let's talk about the kid that is gaming too much. Say that they're maybe the parent doesn't want them to spend so much time gaming, but we also want to stay in relationship and have like a conversation with them. We don't want to just say you can't game. If you take away the piece of equipment, they'll get angry, they'll start doing things behind your back, they'll get passive aggressive, right? So if we take the substances away, we just look at how do we have a conversation with our 14-year-old that's more of an equal partnership. What would you say to that parent if it wasn't related to substances?
I say get clear, parent yourself first or with your parenting partner, because for me, that's when it goes off the rails. So when I can get clear of, of what are the needs underneath I think I'm trying to meet and they're trying to meet, that helps me, because otherwise it's just an argument and it's adversarial, and no one really knows the right amount of gaming that's healthy or whatever. So it's really, what am I okay with? And when it goes beyond, let's say 2 hours a day, then what? So I think it's really just getting clear with myself about what this is all about, like what's underneath it. There's usually a lot of stuff underneath. Like I go to awfulizing thinking like, oh, they're never going to get their homework done, and then they're never going to go to college, and then they're going to become a loser, and they're never going to get a job. And, I just go to future spin out.
Right. Well, and so then so what you're bringing up is some really great things about needs, right? What do we need for ourselves? And so then it's like, let's flip the conversation back around. Okay. We've all been 14, right? 15, 16, high school period. We've made horrible decisions in our I'll just say high school period, our adolescent youth, right? Maybe some people out there didn't. I know I sure made some experimental things. I don't know about you. I don't know when you were in high school, but there may have been some
I did too.
questionable decisions that got made. So then I have to step back. Let's take ourselves out of the parent mode and start thinking about when I was going through this. And I'll just be really vulnerable right here, right? God, I hope my mom doesn't watch this. But when I started having sex as a teenager, right, I was very emotionally immature. I couldn't have a conversation with my mom because I didn't feel safe enough to have the conversation about what does it mean to have sex as a teenager, right? What I could have needed as a teenager was that open door to have a mature conversation with my mom as it related to the decisions that I was making. So
and you didn't worry about being judged. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. And I didn't worry about being judged. So say you have a 14-year-old kid that is starting to experiment with substances outside of our own freak out mode of what that could potentially mean. Let's put ourselves back as the adolescent kid. What's the conversation that if you were experiencing that at 14 that you wish that you had with your parents?
Yeah. And it's a lot of understanding. It's a lot of, I believe you. I see you're trying to meet needs. You're not being bad. And so it's not, again, it's just bring back all my judgment and just heap on understanding and relating.
Make good decisions, right? Like, how do we make good decisions? If you're going to drink, how do we teach someone? Because here's what, unfortunately, because we have zero control over what someone's going to do. When we make blanket statements about you are not allowed to do this, what does that generally do for the other person? Does that mean you are so right? I am not ever going to drink again. Is that what generally happens?
No, especially with
any
teens.
parent forbids anything.
Yeah.
What happens?
Because they do not want to be told what to do.
So it's like, okay, how can we make safe, mature decisions, even if we don't like it, even if we don't agree with what we're doing? I am not saying that I am signing up for you being a drinker, but I can't control it either. How do we make mature decisions? I didn't know how to make mature decisions when it came to substances when I was younger, right? I was very immature. I didn't feel safe. I made a lot of really stupid decisions. I couldn't tell my mom that I was completely wasted. And I got myself, because I couldn't tell my mom I was wasted, I put myself more at risk because I didn't have a way to get out.
Right.
I could only hide it. That was my choice. So I'm not saying that we're signing up to say that it's okay for a teenager to drink. We're not. Can't control it. How do we make mature decisions though and be vulnerable with the kids? So that's where it's like, let's just back into this a little bit.
Right. And say, this is a really tricky situation, not you're bad, you should, not judgy, but really just go, oh, I know you're trying to meet needs. Let's have a conversation about this. And then it is the parent's job, and all of our job, the discussion we're having is to set a boundary. What's okay with me? What's not okay with me? And if so my way of saying it is, if you game more than 2 hours, then let's talk about what the consequence is going to be, because I am the director of health and safety and I care about you. I love you. And the research I've read is that that's not great for you to spend more than this amount of time. So, right. And then get them involved in it.
Right. Well, and have the conversation, right? So when parents can really talk, and when I say talk, it's like ask a lot of questions first. So when
curiosity.
Right, curiosity. So when you got really drunk at 14, how did you feel the next day?
Yeah. Right?
And be like, okay, so do you think that maybe you got a little bit carried away with your drinking? Did that meet the need that you were trying to meet? And more than likely they'll say no, right? And it's like, okay, well, so how can we do this? Like, is there another way that maybe you could start doing it? Kind of just start get them thinking about it. Because if the kid, and I don't care how old they are, they could be 30 years old, they could be 14. If the kid is so busy trying to prove you wrong, they won't be able to see, they'll get in their own way every time, right? Yeah. If they're so busy resisting you, they may not even see that they don't like what the decisions that they're making.
Right. This is such a good example, and I don't want to leave out the people who are not parents or don't have a teenager. What's another, just about boundaries, because it's so good to get into that framework of when you do this, like if maybe it's a couple and or a sister and a brother, when you yell at me, or when you, I don't know what another good example is, then I am going to leave the room or something, because we can't tell, again, someone what to do. Don't yell at me. It just makes them more angry, and then you've got conflict.
Right.
So what's a good framework for getting people to have more success speaking the boundary in the first place, and then holding it? Because that's what a lot of feedback was, is how do I hold the boundary when they react?
So a lot of times what I tell people is, when it comes to boundaries, it's a whole lot less about what you say and a whole lot more about what you do. Right? So you can say it and establish the expectation, but then what's the action that goes along with it? And if you're changing a dynamic, so like say you're in a pattern where, people are yelling and all of that stuff. If you're in the same pattern and you start disrupting that pattern, there is going to be resistance no matter what. Keep showing up in an action-oriented way. So what's the action behind the boundary, right? So it's like, listen, people aren't going to ever listen to what you say. They're only going to listen and pay attention to what you do. So if every time they start yelling, you just kind of leave the house, they will quickly figure out that they can't just keep yelling at you because you're just going to leave. And they have to figure out a different way to have a conversation. Yeah. So it's like, what are you doing? Not what are you saying?
Yeah. And I also think it matters the energy I'm coming from, because so often, again, when I speak from that reactive place, the energy is very adversarial, and that's not going to get me the result I want, which is relating, which is understanding, which is connecting. And so for me, it's do my own work first before I try to set a boundary. And again, that's not always possible. I get to be human. Maybe I'm scared. Maybe I am angry. Then I just need to speak from I instead of you, because that's more effective.
Well, and I think, and this is a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day, so we may not be able to get into this today. But it's also, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. It like froze out for a second, and I was like, oh, am I still here? Okay. I'm sorry.
Take your time. Take your time. But I do think I love what you just said, because I think we want to have a second or maybe even a third on boundaries.
When we go into a conversation, if we're planning a boundary, we're having a conversation, and someone didn't meet our expectations about how that conversation was going to play out, we can get really adversarial as well. So it's being mindful of the expectations that we're going into it. It may be that we have to just stay in the conversation and not force the expectations of what we were hoping to see from the conversation. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. Expectations play a big part into boundaries, because a lot of people get really irritated and pissed off and go into those conflicts because they were expecting something different.
So they're attaching to the result instead of the relationship, and understanding and speaking, but also listening.
Yeah, they forget about the journey through the conversation, where they just want to get to the end result. And then they lose the whole sense of being curious. So you seem rather upset. Can you just tell me a little bit more about why that is?
Yeah.
So I can make sure that I hear you and understand fully. And then they can just start having a conversation versus why are you upset? You weren't supposed to get upset, right?
Yeah. And if everyone's upset, take a break. Can we circle back?
Yeah.
Because that emotion for me often just puts me into shutdown. I get armored, and because of my own childhood stuff. And so it's really how to have a boundary conversation that's successful for both of you. It's about the relationship, not about the outcome. So it's hold the strategy and the outcome lightly, and really hold tightly to the relationship and the needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brene Brown talks a lot about the armor that we put on to protect ourselves. And when we start going into these conversations, sometimes we've unconsciously armored up in such a way that it makes it so difficult to have a real conversation, because we're so focused and armored on protecting ourselves.
Right.
And
that's such a great point.
Yeah. And that's Brene Brown's work, right? How do we take the armor off to be able to have real conversation?
Right. And let them have emotion, because their emotion is not about me. So that's the unenmeshment. It's let them have their emotion. I can have my emotion. Points to needs, and it points to relationship.
Yeah.
So we're almost at the end of our time. I know you and I could talk about this for days. And so why don't we focus and plan on a part 2? And again, people can put their comments, their questions, and what else they'd like to hear about it, what examples they have, because we want this to be such a collaborative, engaging situation for all of us. This is a community, and this is for all of us. This is not just ours. So we look forward to hearing what you think. And again, if you're watching with the replay, just again, keep the questions coming, because we love that.
Yeah. And please, if you have questions or comments about what you've seen and you want to talk more on an individual level, I'll speak for me, and I'm sure Allison, you are also available to talk. And you can always just either personal message us either through Facebook, or I'll share my email. It's Jennifer M Consulting at gmail.com. And that'll,
we can put it in the comments too.
We can put it in the comments too, but
and especially if you have a child who's struggling with addiction, that's Jen's expertise. Or if you have a parent who's either struggling with a child who's angry or anxious, just intense family dynamics, that's what I help parents transform and have more connection.
Yeah. So excellent. Well, you can get our contact in the comments, and as well as just personal messages through Facebook.
Yes. So thank you for being here, and we'll let you know when the part 2 is going to come.
Yeah.
Have a great day.